Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Survival Guide. My name is Mage and today we're discussing the Gnome. The Gnome is a very interesting style of creature that is kind of popular in fantasy and folklore. Distinctly, it is kind of hard trying to pick them apart in some folktales. And the origins of the Gnome are quite messy. Best I can find, the origins of the Gnome are very closely related to dwarves, either them being dwarves or being closely related. Originally, they were seen as short, ugly, and disfigured, small creatures that would hide out in mountains and caves. They would either live in these barrels or protect buried treasure, very protective of their homes and being careful of outsiders. That last part is an important thing that will come up many times in this essay. Later on, gnomes started appearing as short old men, with long, full gray beards and wearing solid color, simple clothes and a pointed cap on top. This has stayed pretty consistently all the way into the modern times. Various cultures did have small distinctions. Some had them as mountain dwellers, living in caves or underground still, very untrusting with outsiders. Other folklore had them living near or on farms, either residing inside the walls of a house or on a small burrow nearby the property. As always, my research and sources are listed down below. One of them that I was very interested and wary of are the books Gnomes and Secret of the Gnomes by Will Hugin. Both the books are very akin to my own work here with the Fantasy Survival Guide, researching and mixing history, folklore, and fantasy. One of the things it says is that a man named Frederick Ugoff found a 6-inch wooden statue in current-day Trondheim, which is in Norway, around the year 1200 AD. Carved in it was 3 words, Nisse Riktig Storalis, which, if this source is trusted, translates to gnome full size. I had a lot of difficulty trying to verify if this statue actually existed. Some sources say it did, others doubted it. According to the source, the wooden statue is currently in possession of a private collection held by someone called the Olive family. Apparently the collection is in a Swedish town, listed here, and I tried doing some research. I don't speak Swedish, and I could not find anything on it, so I am very doubtful if this statue actually exists or is just a figment of this book. Additionally, the book also claimed a Roman soldier in 470 AD reported that he saw a small man in a red cap and clothes, very akin to a gnome. These are the 2 big pieces of evidence for a gnome being on the shorter side, 6 to 10 inches, I want to say. Other sources have the gnomes being taller, around 2 feet tall, this one being more closely to the dwarves that we see in other folklore. There's another prominent source I want to mention. This is a man named Philippus Aurelius Bombastus von Hohenheim, or simply called Paracelsus. He was a Swiss alchemist back in the 1600s that pioneered a whole bunch of medicine during his time. From what I've gathered, he was very important in the medicine that we have today. Going back to his time, he considered gnomes as elemental earth spirits, able to move and swim through dirt like water, and also had some control over natural material. Most of these traits seem to be shared amidst different cultures. Some cultures also had the gnomes having super strength, comparative to their size at least. Additionally, having a sort of venomous bite they used to attack targets. One source specifically said that they did avoid careless damage to nature, even with all this big strength. Now, a danger that they do seem to have is that sunlight apparently turns them into stone. This may be why they reside in burrows or stay indoors. However, contrasting this is there are plenty of tales of gnomes working during the day, so they may use some sort of protection, perhaps like a cloak or full-body clothes. Another interesting detail is the gnomes' connection to the earth. They are masters in working in stone and metal, which in modern fantasy is the domain of the dwarves. From snippets from what I could gather, dwarves were more above ground, working in trees and forests. This is very interesting. I hope to do an essay on this one day. Now, if you were a farmer, having a gnome on your property, this could be both a blessing and a curse. If you were kind to them, whether you knew of their existence or not, either accidentally or intentionally helping them, they would be kind back, either bringing gifts, aiding the farm, or acquiring livestock or supplies to help the farm. Some stories have gnomes stealing from other towns or farms to benefit their host farm. Apparently, horses were their favorite animal, and they would prefer one horse to feed and care for extra. However, on the other side, if you happened to be mean or upset a gnome, even if you intended or not, even if you knew the gnome existed, bad things could happen. it would wreak havoc in your house or your farm, killing animals, stealing supplies, or worse. One specific story has a gnome being left out a gift of porridge and butter by a young girl. However, the girl wanted to do a small thing. She placed the butter underneath and out of sight with the porridge. So when the gnome got to the gift, he got very angry not finding the butter, and he went and killed an animal. Later on, he came back to the porridge and found the butter. Regretful of his actions, he went and he stole or replaced the animal from a nearby farm and gave it to the young girl. Some types of gnomes were actually family makers, very protective of their families and their burrows, never revealing their location to outsiders or teaching people their secret language. Family was very important to gnomes, and one source said that females would only give birth once, and usually to twins. This is an important detail because if you think about it, this is kind of a curse and a detriment to a gnome community. What this basically boils down to is a gnome community would have a very difficult time trying to grow. If they at most usually did twins, when a mother and father would have twins and then eventually died of old age, the status quo would be even. There would be no more gnomes being made. However, if a gnome died before fathering any children, or if only one gnome kid was born, that means the community would be in decline, be less and less gnomes every generation. And over time, no matter what, this would basically mean the decline of the gnomes. However, on another note, from what I can tell, the gnomes live for an extraordinary amount of time. Some sources have them living up to 400 years. So, in the grand scheme of things, if each generation is 400 years, it would take thousands of years for all the gnomes to die out. Unless there was some sort of outforce hunting them, they would probably last all the way to Revelations. Now with age comes wisdom, and if gnomes actually lived this long, they would be considered very wise. Most stories have them being as intelligent as a human, and with their wisdom and the connection to nature, they are masters of cunning and camouflage. They could hide very well in their territory, using burrows, creating ghillie suit-like garb, or manipulating the terrain to their advantage. Some stories have them being illusionists, or have an unnatural essence to disappear, misdirect, or just be invisible. Completely unrelated to everything else, gnomes also apparently had a connection to Christmas, getting and giving gifts, and in some countries being replicated as paper dolls as decorations. In some stories, they are also the ones in Santa's workshop instead of the elves. Now, final question for this essay. Of all this information, how would you actually fight and defeat a gnome? As with all my essays in the past, I've taken a look at the gnome, seen the weaknesses, how they work, and why would you even want to fight a gnome? For the most part, I honestly don't think you'd want to fight a gnome. It really wasn't until just now that I think that this is the first essay I've done where it's like a proper sentient creature. I think the closest might have been the ghouls, but this is probably the one that's actually more or less like an actual person. And so this is a very interesting discussion. For the most part, you don't really need to fight them. They're smart, wise, they've lived hundreds of years, and they'll probably just want to talk it out. They'll try to avoid combat. However, earlier, they are also very petty. And I think there are two likely scenarios that you'll come across to having to fight a gnome. If there's a particular treasure, or just a treasure in general, you want from the gnome in the mountains, you could possibly go up there and try to find it and take the treasure, similar to various other creatures like the griffin or other sort. The other option has you dealing with a disgruntled gnome. Perhaps you were hired by a townsfolk or a person, whether accidentally or intentionally upset a gnome, and the gnome is currently destroying their property. In this case, they could hire you to go take care of the problem. Either way, I highly doubt you'll engage in open combat with the gnome. As I've already mentioned, they're sneaky, they're camouflage. They would not be out in the open, openly fighting you, especially with all their disadvantages. Since gnomes are so much shorter, they have a huge disadvantage when fighting. They don't have as much leverage as other people. They can have to use smaller weapons, and any armor they wear will proportionally have to be bigger to them than it would be to a normal person. For the most part, they probably wear simple armor, things like jack chains, gambesons, or even coat plates. Even though they're wise and quite intelligent, they don't seem to be that industrious. They wouldn't seem to be building these very intricate and sophisticated devices when something simple could just work as well. Another option they could do is wood armor. Even though they are metal workers, they also have a connection to nature, and they may use some wood armor like Native Americans or other ancient cultures. Now, as for what kind of weapons they would use, they have a massive disadvantage no matter what. Because they're so small, any proportional weapon is going to be far smaller than whatever an adventurer or human would have. Even if they use their version of a greatsword or billhook, it wouldn't even compare to a sidearm. Now, to be fair, the blades aren't any less lethal. Any edge doesn't need that much force to be lethal. A gnome axe probably couldn't cleave through a bone or whole arm, but a sword or anything else could probably slice through the flesh and maybe nick some arteries. Blunt weapons like hammers and maces probably wouldn't work. If it's proportional to them, it wouldn't be that much to us. However, if they actually have super strength, proportional to their body size, like some tales say, they could possibly have something the same weight as a normal hammer. On the other hand, regardless if they have super strength or not, it probably wouldn't matter too much in actually grappling or weapon versus weapon. What I mean that is if, say, you're in the bind or two weapons are clashing, the bigger person would have much more leverage than the gnome. And even if they have super strength, unless it's something crazy, something completely out of the realm, you would actually have more leverage than them, just because this has a lot more leverage than this. Getting out of the Theorycraft and actually doing something physical, there was a concept that I came up with when I was working on this. You can have the advantage against fighting a gnome no matter what. Height, leverage, strength, whatever. For the most part, you'll either be even or better at it. There was one thing that I thought of that actually might switch things up. There's a phenomenon, I'm not sure what it's called, but let's just call it the Pythagorean theorem. But when you're fighting an opponent, stretch your arm out and try to hit their shoulder. If I hit this tree, who's going to be my enemy for today, I hold it out and I can hit them, right? Shoulder to shoulder, I can hit them right here. Now I'm going to go and hit them at the leg. And I can't, because of the angle. If you imagine, say I'm fighting an actual person, I can strike them fine and hit them. However, if I'm fighting a gnome, I have to aim lower. And if I aim lower, I can't hit them. I can hit up here if they were normal size, but I can't down here, even if I'm aiming for the shoulder in both times. To fix this issue, you could just step forward and still hit the gnome. I could just crouch and touch the same thing. I can't hit up there now, but now I can hit them. Or you could just have a polearm and just hit them from really far over there, so it doesn't really matter how far you are. You're going to have superior range no matter what. Now, the same goes for the gnome. If they have the thing right here and they're fighting against you, and they go for your head, they can't hit it now. They have to aim lower. For the most part, gnomes would probably aim for your waist down, either your shins, hamstrings, there's a few tendons down there, so they have plenty of options, but everything up is probably safe, unless they have a bow or something like that. Now, to solve this issue, you could just wear leg armor, jacklinks, chainmail, even some sort of gambeson or maybe some plate. However, like I said earlier, I don't really expect the gnomes to be fighting in open combat. They wouldn't really attack you from in the open. They would play to their strengths and be guerrilla fighters, hiding in the shadows, stealthing, using their superior either illusionist techniques or just making like ghillie suits or hiding in the foliage. They would try to strike from stealth and hit you when you aren't expecting it. For the most part, the weapons, they'd be sidearms and bows. I don't expect them to be really using bigger stuff that would slow them down comparatively. They would use smaller stuff that they can run and move easy and fit through tighter spaces. If you're hunting a mountain gnome, you'll probably come across booby traps in their territory. And even if you spot one of them, chasing them would be fruitless. They'll know all the ins and outs of the land, they'll have burrows or hidey holes scattered everywhere, and it'd be very difficult to keep up chase. Even if you find a burrow or their home, flushing them out would be difficult unless you use some sort of hot liquid or some other thing to get them out, perhaps smoking them out. On the other hand, if you're hired to clear a house of a pesky gnome, the home gnome has access to a lot of dangerous items, such as kitchen knives, frying pans, and maybe hot liquid that's been on the fire. They could use any of these in traps or resort to dangerous tactics, something like setting the house on fire or trapping you in a cellar. All these things together make it very difficult to actually fight a gnome that's not in the open and stupid. To beat a gnome, you kind of have to play their own game. You have to set your own traps, perhaps laying valuables out in the open, getting them distracted, or maybe placing on a common route you know a gnome might pass by. If you do find a burrow, you could flush them out like the liquid I said earlier, perhaps beekeeper smoke, or some other thing to try to get them out of here. You can also just use a shovel and some elbow grease trying to do that as well. I mentioned earlier that gnomes would steal from other homes or neighbors to benefit their host home. If that happens to a home that has another nesting gnome, that gnome may not like the original gnome since they stole from their property. And there may be some sort of rivalry between homes. In that case, you could get in contact with this gnome, and they could probably help you to sort of eliminate their rivalry. Finally, the last thing I want to discuss is falconry. I mentioned this ages ago, my first ever video, talking about the griffin. And it's a concept I do want to talk about more because it's a fascinating idea, and it would be one of the most powerful tools in Adventurer's Toolkit. In this specific case, it would be incredibly powerful. Since gnomes are so distrusting of outsiders, they would be very wary of any human in the area, and most likely would stealth and you probably wouldn't even see them. However, if you had a falcon or some type of falconry bird, you could use them to hunt or to scout for the gnome. They could be high in the air, hundreds of feet, or the gnome might even see it and not even worry about it because it's just a bird. The falcon would follow, either leading you to the burrow of the gnome, whether you're looking for treasure or trying to get the actual gnome, or it could just, swoop down to the 6-inch to 2 feet gnome and either pick it up to drop it off at a huge height, letting gravity do the work, or bring it back to you to capture it. If the falcon does drop them from a great height, the gnomes earlier were said to be able to swim through earth. So would this basically be like a high dive for them? Like if you drop them from the sky and they hit the ground, will they just swim right through it? Is there surface tension with the ground? I don't really know, but maybe it was some rock, or you could just drop them on water and let surface tension take care of the problem. All in all, falconry is a very interesting topic, and it's something I want to discuss more. I want to get in contact with a falconry expert and get their opinion on how a fantasy adventurer would use them, as well as get some community feedback. Another thing you could do is if you find a gnome, whether by traps or by capturing them or attacking with a sword, is trying to expose them to sunlight. Since they have an aversion, or at least some do, you could slash at their cloak, opening it up, making them exposed. Or you could open up a window in the farmhouse, letting the daylight in. Or if they're in a burrow, you just get a shovel, scoop it up, and now, poof, they're exposed to the sun. Thank you all so much for watching this essay. It has been a long time, nearly 7 months since my last essay, and I am glad to have it back up. I took a little break because of reckoning and various other things and just being too busy. You want to check out all the sources I used for this essay. I have them right here. And I also have a Word Anvil website, which you can see the essay in text form, as well as a few images and cool things to look at. Regardless of all of that, thank you all for watching, good luck, and God bless your adventures. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, thank you for this blessing, thank you for the chance to be out here to enjoy the beautiful world you've created. Thank you to look back at what's been here in the past, what creations people have made, look at things they built with their hands, and help me to live in a world with intention, to intend to do things with meaning, not just a blank brain rot, a blank space, just existing. Help me to have meaning, to make people's day better, and to enjoy life. Thank you, God, and thank you for all you've done. Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.